Kirk Douglas lived to 103 years old and spent most of those years being one of the most honest people in Hollywood. Honest about his ambition, honest about his failures, honest about the enormous gap between the image he projected and the man living inside it. He was born in poverty so complete that he has described his family's early life in upstate New York as something most Americans of his era simply would not believe. And he died one of the most celebrated figures in the history of American cinema, having spent the intervening century doing things in roughly the order he wanted to do them and saying things he meant. When it came to women, he was equally direct. He once said in an interview, "The first thing I look for in a woman is warmth, femininity. It has nothing to do with a pretty face. That distinction, between the surface of beauty and the quality beneath it, is the thread that runs through every woman he singled out across a career that spanned more than 90 films and 6 decades of Hollywood history." Here are the 6 women Kirk Douglas named, in documented interviews and memoirs, as truly, genuinely beautiful. Number 1 is and Biden's, and this choice matters more than any other on the list because it is the one that cost him the most to arrive at. Douglas met Anne in Paris in 1953 when he was filming Lust for Life, and she was handling publicity for the production. He was, at the time, one of the most photographed men in Hollywood and one of the most aggressively pursued. He had already been married once, had 2 sons, and was by his own honest account conducting himself in ways he was not particularly proud of. He pursued Anne. She refused him, repeatedly, with a composure he found genuinely disarming. She later said she had seen too many actresses have their careers and their dignity dismantled by exactly the kind of man Douglas appeared to be, and she had no interest in becoming another example. He kept coming back. They married in Las Vegas in 1954, and what followed was 65 years of a marriage that Douglas described, consistently and without the hedging that Hollywood husbands tend to apply to public statements about their wives, as the defining relationship of his life. He dedicated his honorary Academy Award to her from the stage. He called her the reason he became the person he wanted to be rather than remaining the person he had been. When she died in April 2021 at the age of 102, 14 months after he did, the symmetry of it felt somehow characteristic of the two of them. He said she was the most beautiful woman he had ever known, and he meant it the way he meant the quote about warmth and femininity, not as a description of her face, but as a description of everything else. Number 2 is Lana Turner. Douglas and Turner made The Bad and the Beautiful together in 1952, one of the most celebrated films either of them appeared in, and one of the sharpest and most unsentimental portraits of the Hollywood system ever committed to celluloid. Turner played a faded actress opposite Douglas's ruthless producer, and the dynamic between them, his manipulative energy and her vulnerability and glamour, produced a film that won 5 Academy Awards and remains one of the defining works of early 1950s cinema. Douglas spoke about Turner in interviews across the following decades with a specific kind of admiration that went beyond the professional. She was, he said, one of those women whose physical presence in a room changed the quality of the air, a quality he described as having nothing to do with deliberate performance and everything to do with something she simply was and could not switch off. He also noted her resilience, the public tragedies of her personal life, the scandals the tabloids treated as entertainment, and said that the ability to absorb that level of public pain without losing her warmth was something he found genuinely extraordinary. Number 3 is Marlene Dietrich. Douglas and Dietrich were involved with each other personally during the late 1940s, a connection he discussed in his memoir The Ragman's Son, with the same bluntness he applied to most things. Dietrich at that point was already a legend. Her work with Joseph von Sternberg at Paramount in the 1930s had established her as one of the defining images of 20th century cinema, and her wartime USO performances had added a layer of genuine historical significance to an already formidable cultural reputation. Douglas said that what made Dietrich beautiful was the specific quality of her intelligence, that everything she did, every gesture, every choice of where to stand in a room, reflected a complete and total awareness of the effect she was creating and a complete command over it. She was, he said, the most technically conscious, beautiful woman he had ever encountered. Someone for whom beauty was not something that happened to her, but something she actively constructed and maintained and understood in forensic detail. He found that combination of self-knowledge and physical magnificence unlike anything else he had seen in his career. Number 4 is Ava Gardner. Douglas said in documented interviews that he was, at one point during the early years of his Hollywood career, surrounded by beautiful women in a way that he described as being like a child in a candy store who does not know which direction to reach first. Gardner was, in his assessment, the woman in that era who most completely embodied the thing that the word was supposed to mean, beauty not as a collection of favorable measurements, but as a total condition of a human being, an effect that radiated outward from something deeper than the surface. He noted the specific tragedy of Gardner's relationship with fame, the way the industry commodified her appearance while consistently undervaluing her intelligence and her genuine acting ability, the way the tabloids pursued her private life with a persistence that would have been recognized as cruelty if it had happened to someone without her face. He said she deserved better from the industry that used her image to sell everything it made for 2 decades. Number 5 is Linda Darnell. This is the most direct and documented statement on this entire list because Douglas said it plainly and on record. Linda Darnell was, in his assessment, the most beautiful woman on the screen. Not one of the most, not among the most, but simply the most. The specific phrasing he used was the most unspoiled star on the screen, and also the most beautiful. Darnell made a series of films in the 1940s and early 1950s that established her as one of the most visually striking presences in American cinema, including Forever Amber, A Letter to Three Wives, and No Way Out. And critics of the era consistently used the same language Douglas would later use. Something about her appearance that was different in kind from other beautiful women rather than different in degree. She died in 1965 at the age of 41 in a house fire, a loss Douglas found genuinely shocking and genuinely sad. The career that had been building towards something more substantial than the studio had ever allowed her to reach was simply ended, without resolution. Number 6 is Gene Simmons. Douglas and Simmons worked together on Spartacus in 1960, the most ambitious film Douglas ever made and the one he remained most proud of for the rest of his life. Not just as a film, but as a political act, his decision to credit the blacklisted screenwriter Dalton Trumbo by name representing one of the most significant individual acts of defiance against the Hollywood blacklist by a working actor. Simmons played Verinia, the slave woman at the center of the story, and her performance was described by critics at the time as one of the finest things in a film full of distinguished work. Douglas spoke about her in interviews with a warmth that was distinct from how he discussed most of his co-stars. She had, he said, a quality of genuine goodness that was visible on screen in a way that could not be manufactured or directed into existence. Beautiful women were common in Hollywood, he noted. Women who looked beautiful because of who they actually were, rather than simply because of the arrangement of their features, were considerably rarer. Simmons, in his view, was one of the latter. The beauty came from inside it and worked outward, and that was, he said, the only kind that lasted. What connects all 6 of these women is the principle Douglas stated explicitly and returned to across decades of interviews. That beauty, properly understood, has nothing to do with a pretty face.